My name is Kaitlyn, and dawn did not bring relief, it brought countable facts. While the city searched for coffee, my phone lit with names that orbit my grandfather. Jennifer with her metronome voice, Stanley with his case files, a quiet accountant who could turn ink into evidence. Between the buzz of alerts and the ache in my chest, I realized last night had not ended anything. It had only broken the seal. I stopped replaying the dining room and started tracking the trail. Tickets purchased, locks ordered, balances that told a story my parents never would. My mother jumped in. "Harold, just tell the truth." She turned to Walter with tears in her eyes. There were some financial difficulties after the recession. We had to make some adjustments. "By stealing from your daughter?" Walter's voice was ice cold. "It wasn't stealing," my father protested weakly. "We're her parents. We were looking out for her best interests." I found my voice at last. "By letting me struggle with student loans in a tiny apartment with a roommate while you lived in a 5-bedroom house with a pool? By watching me stress about making rent while you bought new cars and went on luxury vacations? How exactly was that in my best interest?" Jennifer quietly placed a glass of water in front of me. I hadn't realized I was shaking until I tried to pick it up and nearly spilled it. Stanley had been examining the financial records with a growing frown. There appear to be numerous unauthorized withdrawals beginning approximately 7 years ago. Large sums transferred to personal accounts belonging to Harold and Diane. He looked up, his expression grim. "Based on my preliminary review, it appears that all but approximately $300,000 has been diverted from the trust." The room went silent. 8 million reduced to 300,000. I felt physically ill. "Where is the money now?" Walter asked, his calm voice belying the fury evident in his eyes. My father looked down at his hands. "Some of it went to pay off our mortgage, some for cars, renovations to the house, investments in Diane's real estate business. Vacations," my mother added quietly, "and the house in Florida." Memories flashed through my mind, painful in their new context. My parents declining to help with my security deposit on my first apartment after college, telling me that my student loan burden was good character building when I expressed anxiety about the payments, my mother showing off her new Mercedes while I took the bus to work because I couldn't afford car payments, all while they had access to millions of dollars that were meant for me. "You let me struggle," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "All those years, all those sleepless nights worrying about money. You watched me work 2 jobs during college. You saw how stressed I was about being laid off last week." My voice grew stronger with my anger. "And you had my money the whole time. You were living off my trust fund while letting me think I was on my own." "It wasn't like that," my mother insisted, tears streaming down her face now. "We always intended to pay it back. Things just got out of hand." "Out of hand?" I repeated incredulously. "You stole nearly $8 million from me." Walter placed a steadying hand on my arm. "Jennifer, please call Detective Ramirez. I believe he's still with the Financial Crimes Unit." "Walter, no," my father exclaimed. "There's no need to involve the police. This is a family matter." "Theft is a criminal matter," Walter replied coldly, "particularly at this scale." "Please," my mother begged. "We can fix this. We can sell the house, the cars pay it back." Walter looked at me. "Kaitlyn, this is ultimately your decision. They stole from you. Press charges or not, it's your call." I looked across the table at my parents, people I had trusted implicitly my entire life. The shock was giving way to a deep, aching sense of betrayal that I knew would never fully heal. "I need time to think," I managed. "I can't process all of this right now." Walter nodded. "A reasonable request." He turned to Stanley. "Have counsel seek an emergency court order to freeze transfers and send immediate hold notices to the institutions. I also want a full forensic accounting of every penny that left that trust." "Already in motion," Jennifer said from her position by the door. "The team will work through the night." "And the apartment?" Stanley asked. "Coordinate with the building manager to secure it tonight," Walter said. "New keys to Kaitlyn once counsel confirms control." My father made one last desperate attempt. "Walter, be reasonable. Where are we supposed to go? My grandfather fixed him with a stare that could have frozen fire. You have a 5-bedroom house purchased with stolen money. Enjoy it while you can. The real estate fraud unit will be particularly interested in how a property purchased with trust fund money was titled in your names. The restaurant manager knocked tentatively on the door, poking his head in to ask if we needed anything else. The tension in the room was so thick, it seemed to have its own gravitational pull. Just the check, Walter said dismissively. We're finished here. As the manager retreated, I looked around the table at these people who were my family, wondering how I had never seen the truth before. My parents, unable to meet my eyes. My grandfather, steady as a rock beside me. Jennifer and Stanley, efficient and professional in the face of this family implosion. Nothing would ever be the same after tonight. The foundations of my life had been revealed as lies, and I had no idea what would be left standing when the dust settled. The car ride home was silent and suffocating. I had declined Walter's offer to stay at one of his properties, needing the familiar comfort of my own apartment, shabby as it was. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I watched my parents standing frozen on the sidewalk outside the restaurant, suddenly looking small and old in the harsh streetlight. When I walked through my apartment door, Olivia took one look at my face and knew something was terribly wrong. She guided me to the couch, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and waited patiently while I struggled to find words. My parents stole $8 million from me. I finally said the words sounding absurd even as they left my mouth. I told her everything, the story spilling out in disjointed pieces. The trust fund I never knew existed. The apartment that was supposed to be mine. The years of financial struggle that had been completely unnecessary. As I spoke, the shock began to give way to a bone-deep anger I had never experienced before. I applied for food stamps last year, I said, my voice breaking. I was eating ramen for dinner 4 nights a week to save money. And they were using my trust fund to remodel their kitchen and buy luxury cars. Olivia held my hand tightly as I cycled through shock, rage, and grief. At some point, she made tea that grew cold on the coffee table. My phone buzzed constantly with texts and calls from my parents, which I ignored. The only message I responded to was from Walter, confirming that I was safe and asking if I needed anything. The next morning, Jennifer called with updates. Walter's legal team was moving quickly. They had already confirmed that the house in Florida, my parents' primary residence, and both their vehicles had been purchased using money from my trust. A forensic accountant was tracking down every withdrawal and transfer. The preliminary findings indicate that approximately $300,000 remains of the original trust, Jennifer explained in her efficient way. Most of the money went to real estate purchases, luxury items, and some high-risk investments that performed poorly. The days that followed passed in a blur. I took sick leave from my job search, unable to focus on anything beyond the immediate crisis. Walter sent a car each day to bring me to meetings with attorneys, financial advisors, and eventually a therapist specializing in family trauma. A week after my birthday, we learned that my parents had purchased plane tickets to Panama 3 days before my birthday dinner. They had been planning to leave the country immediately after the celebration, apparently realizing that Walter might discover their deception at any moment. The only reason they hadn't fled already was that they needed to maintain appearances until after my birthday, which they knew Walter might attend. The extended family fractured along predictable lines. My father's siblings defended him, suggesting that Walter was overreacting to what was just poor financial management. My mother's side was more divided, with her sister calling me directly to apologize for what her sister had done. The most surprising ally came in the form of my cousin Natalie. She showed up at my apartment unannounced one afternoon, looking uncharacteristically subdued. I always wondered why Uncle Harold and Aunt Diane lived so well when Dad said our trust funds were basically the same size, she admitted, sitting uncomfortably on my worn couch. I guess now we know. It turned out that Natalie's trust had been properly managed but was much smaller than mine had been. She had been careful with her money, making it last, while flaunting a lifestyle that was more modest than it appeared on social media. I was always jealous of how close you seemed with your parents, she confessed. My parents were honest about the money, but they were never really there for me emotionally. I thought you had loving parents and were being modest about your wealth. I never imagined they were stealing from you. That conversation was the beginning of an unexpected friendship with my cousin, one bright spot in the darkness that had engulfed my life. The legal proceedings moved forward relentlessly. Walter's team discovered that only about $300,000 remained of my original trust. The rest had been spent on my parents' lavish lifestyle or lost in bad investments. The house in Florida and their primary residence were both seized, as they had been purchased directly with trust fund money. The cars, the boat my father rarely used, my mother's extensive jewelry collection, all documented and evaluated for potential recovery. Through it all, my parents continued their desperate attempts to contact me. The messages shifted from attempted explanations to outright begging as the legal consequences became clear. My father called from a hotel room claiming they had nowhere to go. My mother sent long emails about how everything they did was ultimately for my benefit, though she never managed to explain exactly how their luxury lifestyle had helped me in any way. The media caught wind of the story. Eventually, a business publication ran a small piece about Walter Harrington's family financial dispute. Though they didn't mention me by name, the article hinted at significant misappropriation of trust fund assets by close family members. I deleted all my social media accounts, temporarily unable to face questions from acquaintances who might connect the dots. The worst part was the constant gnawing guilt that plagued me despite being the victim. Had I somehow driven my parents to this? Should I have noticed something was wrong? Was I overreacting by allowing Walter's legal team to pursue them so aggressively? The therapist Walter had arranged explained that this was a common response for victims of familial betrayal, but understanding the psychology didn't make the feelings any less real. After 3 weeks of legal meetings and emotional turmoil, Walter invited me to dinner at his penthouse. The space was surprisingly warm and comfortable despite its obvious luxury. Ice clicked softly in the tumblers as he poured. City lights smeared across the glass like brush strokes, and somewhere in the background a jazz record hissed under the hum of the HVAC. He fixed us both drinks himself, dismissing the staff for the evening to give us privacy. "I want you to know that none of this is your fault," he said, looking at me directly. "Your parents made their choices. They betrayed not only you, but the trust I placed in them." "I keep thinking I should have known," I admitted. "There were signs." "You had no reason to suspect your own parents of stealing from you," Walter replied firmly. "Especially when you didn't even know the money existed." That night, Walter showed me photographs I had never seen before. My grandmother, who had died when I was too young to remember her. Walter as a young man, building his first development. My mother as a child, sitting on Walter's shoulders at a park. "Family is complicated," he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "Your grandmother and I didn't always see eye to eye on how to raise your mother. I was often too strict, too focused on building the business. Perhaps if I had been different, your mother might have developed a healthier relationship with money." It was the closest thing to vulnerability I had ever seen from my grandfather, and it helped me begin to understand that the betrayal had layers beyond my own pain. My parents had not only stolen from me, they had betrayed the father who had tried to secure his granddaughter's future. 1 month after my birthday, I finally agreed to meet with my parents. The legal mediation was scheduled at Walter's attorney's office, a sleek space in a downtown high-rise that made my parents look even more out of place than they already felt to me. They had visibly aged in the past month. My father's face was gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her purse. They were dressed in clothes I didn't recognize, more modest than their usual attire. I later learned they had been forced to sell much of their designer wardrobe. The conference room was intimidatingly large for our small group. Cold air pooled around our ankles. Highlighters bled neon across binders. A glass carafe clicked against porcelain as someone poured water. Walter sat beside me with Stanley and 2 other attorneys from his team nearby. My parents had a single lawyer, a nervous-looking man who kept shuffling his papers. The financial forensics team presented their findings with clinical precision. Charts and graphs detailed the systematic draining of my trust over 7 years. What had begun as borrowing small amounts had escalated to major withdrawals. The money funded their house purchase, cars, expensive vacations, my mother's failed attempt to start a luxury real estate agency, and my father's disastrous foray into day trading. As the evidence mounted, My father's posture became increasingly defensive, while my mother simply stared at the table, occasionally wiping away tears. When the presentation concluded, Walter spoke directly to my parents. The forensic accounting is complete. We know exactly where every dollar went. The only question remaining is whether this proceeds as a civil matter or whether criminal charges will be filed. My parents' attorney cleared his throat. My clients are prepared to cooperate fully. They understand the gravity of their actions and wish to make amends to the extent possible. Amends? I repeated, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. You stole my future. You watched me struggle while you lived off money that was meant for me. How exactly do you plan to make amends for that? My father couldn't meet my eyes. Kaitlyn, we never meant for things to go this far. It started small, just borrowing a little to get through a rough patch. Then it became easier to take a little more and a little more. My mother winced. We were scared of looking like failures. Status felt safer than honesty. Part 3 is live now on the channel. Continue the story.